Hi, my name is Philippa. I'm from British History Tours, and today I want to talk to you about Henry VIII and how he ended up in a hole under the choir at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Many, many moons ago, I got into history by reading about Elizabeth I, and I quickly realised that to understand her story, I had to start going backwards and reading about her father, and anyway, carried on, and which is why I do what I do now. And I always like to follow in the footsteps of whoever I'm looking into. Again, that's how I've got into what I'm doing now. And so my travels led me to finding where Henry VIII's final resting place was. I had seen his daughter Elizabeth I's tomb at Westminster Abbey, nice and impressive as it is. His parents' tomb in the Henry VII Chapel there. Again, lovely, impressive, very, very grand. And so I went to St George's Chapel, Windsor, to find Henry's. And when I got there, I found that it was a simple black marble slab, which breaks up the black and white pattern, harlequin pattern, which is on the floor in tiles. And not only was it just a simple black slab, this black slab was put there 300 years after Henry had died on the orders of William IV. Again, not only that, but what it does is list the people who are in this tomb in order that they went in there. So not an order of priority, anything like that. So it goes Jane Seymour, Henry VIII, Charles I, and an infant child of Queen Anne. So this is not, I think, what we know Henry was assuming would happen after his death. He was so in control of his self-image during life that we can, I think, safely say that he would be rather annoyed that his grave had remained unmarked for 300 years and was then marked simply by a marble slab. But that, of course, wasn't where Henry thought he would end up. This was a temporary place next to his third queen, Jane Seymour. He had left instructions for a tomb. He had the sarcophagus already. It was confiscated from his Chancellor Cardinal Wolsey. So he had this sarcophagus already. And the tomb that would have been created around it would have had effigies of him and Jane Seymour. It would have been covered in angels, the prophets. There was going to be white and red roses cascading down from the top, cherubs throwing out rose petals. You know, it was going to be magnificent. It was going to evoke all the memories of this Renaissance king, this powerful man. People were going to say mass there was going to be masses said at the tomb daily, and it didn't happen. He had the impressive funeral, the ceremony, the processions, the whole pomp and circumstance around what you would expect for a king, and that had been very carefully planned out. And that was for more than just Henry's own self-satisfaction that this is what was going to happen. This was important politically because it said Henry had been the rightful king. He may have only been the second Tudor king, but this was a significant dynasty. This was the one that they were rightful kings. These are the ones that were going to rule the country properly. And by extension, that his son, Edward VI, was the rightful king. He should be unattested. He's only 9 years old, but that doesn't matter. You know, he is your king. So it was all very carefully crafted. So why did Henry end up left in his temporary tomb? Why didn't Henry get his tomb created himself? There are a couple of theories. There's probably more. There's a couple that I have. One is money. Henry was very good at spending money, so he didn't have a lot of money left. But then, back to my first point, he was quite good at spending it if he wanted to. So would that really have put Henry off creating it. I don't personally think so. What I think put Henry off creating his tomb was his total lack of acceptance that he would ever have to talk about death. I mean, to talk about the death of the king was treasonous. Even on his deathbed, it took his best friend Anthony Denny, a nervous best friend Anthony Denny, to go and speak to him and say, you need to hear, you need to have the last rites. Important as a Catholic, you need to have the last rites because we don't think you're going to last. Henry was only 55 when he died. Perhaps he just thought this was something for another day. This was something he didn't have to actually think about just yet. So that's Henry. He was followed to the throne by Edward VI, his son, by Jane Seymour. And Edward was only 9 years old when he came to the throne. But Edward was very specific in what he wanted to do. As soon as he came to the throne, his agenda was get the country Protestant. So when Henry died, although he had established a church in England, he died a Catholic. He did not die Protestant. And Edward was a Protestant, and he wanted to continue the sort of the Reformation that had begun into creating a Protestant England. So why would he create a tomb with the Catholic trappings that his father had designed? Clearly wasn't on his agenda. Perhaps he didn't have time. He only reigned for 6 years, dying at the age of 15. So, who's to say? Maybe one day he would have created one, perhaps not to Henry's design. But after Edward, his half-sister, Mary I, comes to the throne. Mary was the daughter of Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. And she was the most hurt by Henry out of the 3 children. She had been forcibly removed from her mother, so as in they weren't allowed to see each other, they weren't allowed to communicate by letter, they certainly weren't allowed to meet in person. Not only was that of the physical separation from her mother extremely traumatic, but she was also asked to say publicly that her father was now head of the church in England. This totally went against what she believed and what she'd been taught, and that her mother and father's marriage had never been a marriage at all, and therefore she was illegitimate. She was expected to agree with all this in public. It went totally against everything that she believed, and it was incredibly traumatic for her. So why would she create a tomb to this father that caused her so much hurt and anguish? And to his design would have been with a subsequent queen, would have been with his design was an effigy of him next to Jane Seymour. Plus, Mary was quite busy trying to turn the religious pointer the other way and get England back to Catholicism. So she was quite busy doing that. When she died, her half-sister, Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry by Anne Boleyn, came to the throne. Now, Elizabeth was very savvy. She was great at knowing what to say, when to say, or at least this appears to be how she operated. And she would invoke the memory of her father to justify the word I'm after, but her own position, to impress on people. She was the daughter of Henry VIII. She had his qualities, she had his strength. Remember the good old days with Henry VIII, you can get them with me. I know what we should do, etc., etc. But when Elizabeth died, she was wearing a locket ring. It's called the Chequers ring. Google it, have a look. And this locket ring opened up, and in the inside were 2 portraits, one on either side, of 2 women. One was Elizabeth herself, and the other believed to be Anne Boleyn, her mother. She died wearing this ring, and so even though she isn't known to have spoken about her mother publicly, we can take from this that privately she had a strong connection, even though she'd only been 2 at the time of Anne Boleyn's execution at the Tower of London. She had obviously felt that connection to an absent mother. Now, with such a strong connection to her mother, again, would she really have spent time, resources, creating a memorial to a father who had put her own mother to death? I think she used Henry's name when she needed it, and but didn't go further than she needed to. Whilst talking about Henry and him being buried next to Jane Seymour, I've heard many people. I think with the fact that he's had 6 wives means everyone wants to. There seems to be a logical step that says, well, which one was his favourite? He must have had a favourite if he had 6, like as if he had 6 cars or something. And which one was the best? Anyway. So, but let's look at it logically. Who he could have been buried with. So the fact he was buried with Jane Seymour leads some to say, well, he obviously loved her the most, and perhaps he did. Perhaps he did. I'm not saying he didn't, but let's just look at them in turn. You had Catherine of Aragon, his first wife. She'd already died by the time he died. Plus, their marriage had been annulled, so we were never married in the first place. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, had been executed at the Tower of London, beheaded and buried under the floor of St Peter ad Vincula within the Tower of London. Then you had Jane, which we'll come back to. Anne of Cleves, his 4th wife, was still alive. They'd divorced after 4 months. His 5th wife was Catherine Howard, who had been executed at the Tower of London, and again was buried in St Peter ad Vincula within the walls. And then you had his 6th wife, Catherine Parr, who was obviously still alive when he died as well. So Jane Seymour really is the only logical wife for him to have been buried with, for those reasons I've just given. Plus, more importantly, she was the mother of the heir, or who was now King Edward VI. And so this being buried with Jane was another stamp on the, to show this is the legitimate king who's taken over from me. My son, he is your king. He's a Tudor and he's legitimate. Boom, get behind him. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's been insightful. I would love to know what you think. I would love to see you subscribe to my channel and connect. I'd love to speak to you. All right, speak to you soon. Bye.